Kenyan conservationist, born and raised here in Kenya, and I've been totally, in love with our wildlife and nature in this country. We're so blessed as Kenyans. We are the biodiversity billionaires. Kenya is a country of more biodiversity than most other countries in the world. We're considered mega diverse as a country. As a child, I grew up surrounded with these animals and nature, and I knew from a very early age that what I wanted to do was conservation. As a young girl in Kenya, in those days, doing conservation was not what Kenyans did, and it was definitely not what girls did. My first request for a job was to Richard Leakey. I wanted to be a ranger. And he asked me why. And I said I wanted a gun, I wanted to go to northern Kenya, and I wanted to look after lions by working with George Adamson. And he thought it was not a very good idea. And he encouraged me to go into science. And I continued and went into science, and I did my undergraduate, my graduate research in monkeys, and then later on elephants. As a Kenyan conservationist and scientist, this is an interesting environment. We are a country whose reputation and economy hinges on the health of our wildlife and our biodiversity. And elephants are right up there as one of the major attractions to this country. But it's an animal that is not that well understood by many people. In fact, the more we look at it, the more we realize that elephants and science is quite elitist, conservation and tourism is quite elitist. As a conservationist, I moved into advocacy and running Wildlife Direct, which is an organization that seeks to change hearts and minds so that Africa's wild species can endure. We want to win the hearts and minds of all Africans. We can't save these animals with foreign dollars. We can't save these animals with just World Wildlife Fund and other international organizations. We need local support for conservation. And that's why at Wildlife Direct we produce wildlife documentaries. Wildlife Warriors TV series, NTV Wild and NTV Wild Talk were all attempts to create interest, awareness, inspire people, and move our own people to action. So when I was invited to come and lead this panel, to moderate this panel, I was so excited because the French embassy said, choose your topic, choose your panel. It's not often you get this chance. And so I created my dream team, and I'm going to ask them all to come up now. My dream team comprises 4 people who work in 4 different sectors: science, communities, law, and media. What I'm going to do is ask each of my panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Philip. He has 3 minutes. I hope I've got a stopwatch. 3 minutes to introduce himself. I'm going to ask Philip not only to introduce himself, but to tell us why he's here. And I want to know specifically what moment in his life he decided he was going to be a world-class scientist. And when Philip is done, he's going to invite the next speaker, who's Kari Mutu. So please go ahead, Philip.
Good evening, everyone. Yes, my name is Philip Muruthi. I'm the Vice President for Species Conservation and Science at the African Wildlife Foundation, AWF. We are an international NGO that is focused on conservation and sustainable development in Africa. Our headquarters is here in Nairobi. I've known Paula for quite some time because we were in school together in the US. We also actually happened to work at the museum at one point. So I come from the Rift Valley, very close to Lake Nakuru National Park. So as a young boy, I was not very foreign to wildlife. But I didn't go to the park until I was in standard 7, although the park is very near. But we interact with wildlife that used to come to our shambas, to our gardens. And just by being around wildlife and around Bahati Forest, where my parents come from, where our home is, I was very much interested in biology. So I ended up in natural sciences, and I ended up being a biologist, just out of that upbringing and being close to wildlife. Now, why I chose to be a PhD in science is because I really strongly believe, as Paula has said in her introduction, that wildlife has a place for the sustainable development of our country and in Africa, as I will reiterate much later. I do believe that if we do a good job of safeguarding the natural resources, we will be safeguarding our well-being, and we won't have much problem in having sustainable development.
Good evening again. My name is Kari Mutu, and I am here as a writer. I'm a freelance writer who covers different topics, and one of my favorites is wildlife, the environment, conservation. And it is in that regard that, well, I've known Paula for many years, and I guess that's why she brought me here. I'm not trained as a journalist. I'm actually trained, and my profession is in the hotel, hospitality, tourism industry, which in this country, you know, is very much tied to the wildlife heritage that we have in Kenya. That is what brings tourists to this country, is the natural heritage and the resources we have here. And as you know, coincidentally, our Ministry of Wildlife is also combined with tourism, but we won't get into that, the politics of that. So I started writing about maybe 12 plus years ago, purely out of an interest in covering topics that were clearly dear to me, they were important to me. And I felt that we could probably broaden how we cover some of these subjects. So I don't come from the traditional journalism training background, having worked for media, but I do write for local publications. It could be newspapers, weekly publications. SWARA, the East African Wildlife Society magazine, is one of the ones I tend to write for quite a bit, and a few international publications. I feel that when it comes to matters, wildlife conservation, the environment, there is more that we could learn as a general audience that is not necessarily involved in the hardcore sciences, hasn't studied it. We're not part of the wildlife management authorities. But this is very much part of a local heritage and a national heritage. So we need to understand what's happening, why it's happening. Why do we cover, for example, elephants only from the negative perspective of they strayed into somebody's farm, or they end up in Kitengela, or they killed somebody? In between all of these horrible stories, what's happening with elephants? What are they doing? What are they up to? And those are the sort of stories that interest me, and I think can bring us closer or more in touch with what's happening outside of our urban environments, and what Paula talked about earlier, just developing that love for nature. And I think the media has a strong role to play in that. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Gitonga. I am a natural resource lawyer, so I'm a lawyer by profession, one of the good ones. I am the quintessential village girl. I grew up in the slopes of Mount Kenya. I came to Nairobi to attend university, as it were. And I do remember one of those trips that anyone who's gone through the Kenyan education system, there's the mandatory class 7 trip and the class 8 trip to, Nairobi, the big city, to expose you to how the real world is. And I remember my class 7 trip was to Nakuru National Park. And it was one of the best memories of my life. I also grew up with a father and a grandfather who valued forests, who valued wildlife. And I was never exposed to the threats of wildlife conservation when I was growing up, because it was plenty where I grew up from. We could literally walk to Mount Kenya Forest, we'd take drives in parks to Olpej and so on and so forth. I was also a bit naughty in high school. I knew how to circumvent rules. I knew how to negotiate myself out of rules applying to me. A good example is I negotiated myself out of having to attend 5 a.m. morning prep with the principal of my high school. And it's at that point when I went home and said, actually, don't wake up early. And my dad said, well, maybe you should consider being a lawyer. Clearly, you're really good at this. And I thought, yeah, and I have a mouth, I can speak. So I went to law school to do corporate law to make money, and to teach law because the family profession is teaching. And when I got to law school, my first environmental law class and land law class, I fell in love. Quick forward to finishing school. 1 year out of school, I met Paula about 10 years ago. Wait, more than 10 years ago. Let's just stop calculating my age. So I met Paula, and she threw me to the deep end. Her motto was, I remember she told me once, the light is always green until it's red. So get on with it and get it done. And I thought to myself, well, we've learned in school that good law is predictable, good law is uniformly applicable, and good law is enforceable. But the law that we have in the environment sector is neither one of these things. You know, you're not able to predict with absolute accuracy how law will apply. And there then started my lifelong quest to ensure that ourselves as a country, as a continent, have good law that supports sustainability. And to round that up, I am now the managing partner at my law firm, which I run with 2 other partners that focuses on environmental law and sustainability law and conservation law. I also chair the East African Wildlife Society, and I teach law at the Riara University, environmental law, amongst other units, trying to create environmentally conscious and passionate advocates and lawyers for the future. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is John Kisimir. Unlike Paula, I never wanted to do science or do conservation. I remember in early life, what I was taught is, if you see a ranger, you see KWS, don't talk to them. You know, we used to call them the Blackfeet. Basically means the enemy. The thing I learned when I was growing up is stay away from conservation. Just get a career, get out of here, go. And that's exactly what I did, because I never saw it as anything. The conflict between my people in Kajiado and the government at that time was so bad. You don't want to be associated with. And moved on, made a life, lived in many countries. I started coming back home around 2007, and the shock on me was how wildlife has literally disappeared. My family has a big ranch, and wildlife was everywhere. Gymnos, literally wildlife has disappeared. Either because the land was subdivided, so people settled where wildlife used to be, or people Nairobi was so hungry for wildlife meat that time. Zebras, anything that moved was being killed for your butchery. So probably the nyama choma you're eating that time, probably now is still from zebras and other animals. So, and I think that hurt for me to come, walk in the ranch and see nothing really hurt, because we say the wild is we say the savanna with wildlife has some kind of harmony with it, you know, where you see things, it's beautiful. And we started this soul-searching kind of process, even as a family. Like when we have a problem with lions, we know it's because the zebras are not there. Because when we have so many zebras, we had so many gazelles, lions will stay away, you know. When they're hungry, they'll come for you or whatever you have in your boma. So we started this discussion, what do we do, you know, it's because still we see even with all this science, wildlife is still dying, you know, wildlife is disappearing, no one is saving anything. And that led us to really trying to figure out what do we do. We tried many things, see what can we do to trigger communities protecting wildlife in absence of government. To me, that was the big mistake we made. And I'm guilty as many other people. We left everything to the government. An elephant is walking around with a spear, and that's KWS's problem. So full circle way back, we are trying. A few years ago, we started an organization called Ramati Conservancies in Kajiado Central. We now have 6 conservancies run by the community. I mean, we try to do things in absence of donors and government to see if people can actually wake up and do those things, something themselves. A model where, because the land is owned by people, we say an elephant in your ranch is your responsibility. If an elephant is killed or a lion is killed or a zebra is seen with a spear, then you are accountable. And you are accountable to the community to see how did that happen. So it's a very, very interesting process. And we've had a huge difference in the last 2 years. What shocked me was we've had 12 giraffes in our ranch for the last maybe 15 years who've never left because they know if they cross the river, they'll die. 6 months ago, they started crossing and going up to 20 kilometers away from where we are, literally at the boundaries of the conservancies. So sometimes we wonder, were the animals listening to us? Do they have this super knowledge, whatever intuition that we don't know? And we see a lot of animals coming back. Elephants are crossing from Tanzania in big numbers again. We're seeing animals we've not seen in 40 years, like the kudu, we now have in many, many numbers. So I'm excited to be here because I think I like to tell these stories. And I like guys like Jimmy, who've not been in our area in a long, long time. I think, was it 204? 204, yeah, 207. That time, you will come and see a lot of changes in Meto, Lorongoswa, Torose areas that you've been before. So thank you.
Thank you to everyone. So as you can see, we have a very diverse panel because we want to look at this nexus, the nexus of science and communication and economy and communities, governance and laws. I think this is a different way of looking at the future of elephants. If you go to many organizations, they'll tell you about the science and the numbers. Others will tell you about crime. Others will tell you about hunting for money. But actually, what I wanted to create here today is a conversation that explores this nexus. The first round of question, I'm going to actually invite whoever wants to speak first. A question that I think will help us to know just how serious the issues are. Like, I want us to prioritize. What keeps you up at night? What keeps you awake at night? We don't have to start with Philip, but I can see him thinking. and I want to hear this from all the panelists. And let me give you from my perspective. As Wildlife Direct, we currently are managing a very tiny piece of property just adjacent to Nairobi National Park. And we invited university students to come and help us do a cleanup to prepare the place for children. We want to do kids' activities and get children to come and count the birds and the insects and learn about the grasses and the plants. And as we were cleaning up, we were with these 76 university students from Nairobi's universities. These are some of our elite thinkers for the future. They did an amazing job, by the way. And at the end, we stood on the rocks to, enjoy the sight of this beautiful river without all the trash. And I took my binoculars and I was looking, and this site, the way we are, it overlooks the Nairobi National Park. And one of the students asked me, "Can I use your binoculars?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And I handed him my binoculars, and he was looking through. I said, "Can you see anything?" And he says, "No, I don't see anything." Because he'd never used binoculars before. He didn't even know how to adjust the binoculars. He's never used the binoculars. He was actually interested in someone taking a selfie of him so that he could put it on Instagram. And it really shocked me. Then I had a long line of students who wanted to use the binoculars to get that selfie. And it occurred to me, I'm busy thinking about children. Even our future leaders who are going to be voting in the next election also actually have never really had some of these experiences that we're already bringing to smaller children. So the need is really, really huge. And that's what keeps me awake. How do we serve all this incredibly huge community of people, especially young people who are entering into the age where they will be making decisions going out into the world, voting, and driving the agenda for this country. That's what keeps me awake at night. Anybody else want to go?
I could go. I think mine is similar to yours. In my line of work, especially where lawyers or advocates for that matter are in the business of conflict resolution a lot of the time. 90% of my work is conflict resolution. The rest of it is advisory. And with the conflicts that land themselves on my desk for resolution or that I come across, 100% of them are as a result of a decision gone wrong by someone in a field other than conservation who does not understand the implications of the decisions they make in their field on natural resources. Case in example, you have a civil engineer who's designing, and this is not an actual example, please don't quote me, don't get me into trouble. You have a civil engineer who's designing the highway that's running right now from JKIA all the way upwards to God knows where. And that civil engineer is designing that road, and he decides that the best route is smack in the middle of all the green. Okay? To him, it's trees that can be cut down, and because, trees grow. You can grow trees. If you're cutting down trees in Nairobi, why don't we grow them in Turkana? There was an article in the paper the other day of a lawyer who said that even if we cut down trees in the Abadeas, we can plant more in Turkana and Isiolo and upwards northern of Kenya, without really understanding the implications of that. You have architects who design buildings not being conscious of how to make a building energy efficient and save energy. That is what keeps me awake. How do we enroll all of these other brilliant, brilliant minds in their own right? How do we enroll doctors, architects, actors, artists? And I'm really thankful to the French embassy for the exhibition they did and recognizing the place of art in communicating some of the issues and solutions that we have. That is what keeps me awake. How do we enroll some of you in this room who came in because you saw a poster of a cute elephant? How do we enroll you to the conversation to find tangible, long-lasting, sustainable solutions?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, as a biologist and as a scientist, I'm kept awake by the very, very possibility of an extinction. The possibility that a species may go extinct. When we were in school, this was looking like a theory. People are teaching us that a species can start from being very common, then become rare, critically endangered, and extinct. And many examples came from abroad. And you are like, oh, okay, that happens in Europe. It happens in America. But today, if I asked you how many grave zebra we have in Kenya, how many wild dogs we have across Africa, how many cheetah do we have? All these animals I'm mentioning to you are some less than 2,000, some less than 5,000. And that gets really dangerous. How many Ethiopian wolf do we have? 500. So this possibility of species going extinct is one that really worries me, because with it goes every other possibility that we are talking about here. Whether we can use, Paula, when she was giving her introductory remarks, talked about Kenya's fame with the elephants, and we are known for our biodiversity. But how many humans really, or even how many people in our population recognize the importance of wildlife and natural vegetation and resources to their own well-being? I'm kept awake sometimes by when I go through, say, near Donholm, and I see the Nairobi River, very polluted. I grew up in a place where we would drink off the river. There are not many places in Kenya that you can do that. And that really worries me, because with that goes species that cannot withstand what humans are doing, and they are going extinct. Some of them are going extinct before we know them. What a dilemma for us when we lose that which you don't even know. you're losing possibilities of cures, for example, for cancer and other diseases. So that worries me. This panel is a good representation of a solution. Or even here, I'm sure you come from different capacities and trainings. What I have learned in my conservation work over 25 years is that scientists are important, but they are not the only solution. We can give information about elephants, numbers, and threats, and extent of those threats. We need lawyers, we need communities, we need the media, and we need leaders. So but also what really gives me hope is that it is not all lost. That the solution lies with us, you and I, and we can stop those extinctions. So that we don't go through the process that John is going, or through the process that Olpejeta and DR Congo are going through, having only 2 northern white rhino remaining in Africa. It's very expensive to recover and reintroduce species. So first, do no harm, and then we shall be fine.
I think the thing that troubles me the most is the limited narratives and stories that we have about wildlife, elephants, conservation in this country. A lot of it tends to be driven by, well, of course, when something terrible happens, then it becomes a front page news for a few days and then we don't hear about it. And also driven by people with interest other than protecting the natural heritage. So they're pushing forward maybe an idea, a proposition that wants to ensure that maybe a particular piece of land is degazetted or it's converted into development, and they'll give their reasons. They'll give their reasons for let's kill the Aberdare forest and put the forest in Isiolo, and from miscommunication. And I think from a media perspective, we do have, we do have an opportunity to broaden that narrative, especially for a general audience that is outside of the scientific community, outside of the wildlife authorities. Because at the end of the day, elephants and all of the wildlife heritage is ours. Like John says in his community, as long as you have an animal on your land, it is your responsibility. That should be the same mentality we have as Kenyans, as citizens, as residents of this country. As long as the animal is in our country, it is our responsibility to look after it. And it doesn't have to be very difficult narratives. So, for example, John mentioned that where he comes from, if there aren't enough zebras, the lions turn to the bomas and start killing. So right away, you see very quickly a connection between the number of zebras, lions killing zebras. That's a narrative that you can get out to a general public and they can begin to understand the interconnectedness between communities, livestock, and wildlife. And it's those sort of narratives that need to get out more and finding ways to do that, whether it's reaching out to your general media who work for the big publishing houses or the big TV companies, or just getting ordinary people who want to tell the stories, whether it is through writing or films like Wildlife Warriors, which is what Paula Kahumba and her people have been doing for a number of years now. We just need to get the message out in an understandable manner so that we can demystify the idea that wildlife is a menace and doesn't deserve to be where it is. It has always been there, and we as Africans have always lived with wildlife. And one last point, which I remember hearing from Dr. Leakey not too long ago before he passed away, and he said, the elephant is the only animal that has evolved in Africa from the very beginning, from talking about millions of years ago. You can trace the evolution of the elephant. And different species of elephant have come and gone and died and gone extinct. And it's entirely possible that the current 2 species we have in Africa could also go extinct and nothing will replace them. So that is a reality, which I agree with, it can happen. But hopefully we cannot let that happen in this continent. Thank you.
What keeps me awake is the hunger of the Morothy generation, where I'm talking about land use in this country, where everybody wants to own a piece of land. And what that means is land is being subdivided every day. I live in Ongatarongai, and right near the national park, and most of the time, zebras will come in, buffaloes will graze right behind my house. Last week, my neighbor came and fenced and started building a flat. Basically, that space is gone. You'll never hear those buffaloes again or any other animal coming nearby. Basically, the land use in this country really worries me because every day some space is going away. If you go, I mean, Kiambu is done. Kiambu is basically not even a rural community anymore. It's Nairobi. Kisii, who's been to Kisii of late? Goodness, yeah, it's a rural slum or whatever you want to call it. Everything has been subdivided to the point where there's basically no space to breathe, let alone have an animal live on it. Kajiado, where we have space for wildlife, that is the next frontier. It's the urban areas in Kajiado, they're advertising all the time. Tinga, Amboseli, whatever it is, urban areas are mushrooming everywhere. Fences right now between Kitengela and Namanga, literally, the highway has been shut from wildlife by fences. So now you see animals walking, they have to cross the highway through the rivers. If there's a river, that's what they used to cross. But it's crazy, it keeps me awake, like, how much do we all have to own something at the expense of everyone else? Like, when we subdivide the savannah, what will be left? There'll literally be no nyama choma, no tourism, but nobody seems to be noticing that. And it's very hard to deal with it because most of you here, everybody wants to own a house somewhere in Kajiado. So when you try to lobby to say, let's zone Kajiado so that people don't build their homes around here, Jimmy, you want to own a home in Kitengela, or Isinya, or Kajiado town. It's very, very hard. And to us who do conservation, that's a problem. If you subdivide, let's say, a 2,000-acre ranch into 100, it's no longer 2,000. It's now fences and fences and fences, and animals will not be able to move around. Thank you.
So those are our bugbears or worse. Those things do literally keep us awake at night. I wonder if there's anybody in the audience who has something about conservation, land, natural resources in Kenya that you want to share. What keeps you up awake at night?
Okay, my name is Hassan. I am an independent activist for conservation, environment, and peace. And it's not a matter of making me awake at night. It worries me, and it ends me getting a lot of anxiety and stress by seeing every day from worst to worst is happening. Not only out there in the natural resources or national parks, etc. And first and foremost, I'll ask also our Elizabeth Gitonga, is that what is happening to our beautiful historic trees around the streets? Millions and millions of people are passing by. All the heads are chopped off.
I was just going to say, it's really wonderful to hear that people do feel the pain when they see trees being slashed in the city. There is a movement to address this and to try and challenge the government. It's called Daima Kenya. It's a group including the Wangari Maathai Foundation, Greenbelt Movement, Wanjira Maathai, Wildlife Direct, and many other organizations. In a way, what's happening to elephants is something that, we always talk about elephants in the room. Elephants are an animal that, let me see, how many people here saw an elephant in the last 7 days? How many? Two people have seen an elephant in the last 7 days. So elephants are kind of far from us, right? It's not something that we are actually concerned about on a daily basis, unless we see a dead elephant on the newspaper. But the trees, we see them every day. We see the damage to the environment around us. We sense the smell of the air changing. We see the froth and the taka in the rivers. It's all interlinked. All of these ecosystems are connected to each other. Ecological processes are all connected to one another. And elephants in a funny way, this is an amazing animal that is a keystone species, which means that it affects many other animals and spaces around it. So it's such a great animal to use as a demonstration, as a center point for conversations around this. I wanted to move on to the next question, but I think Liz has something to add to this.
I think my point to this particular question is this, and forgive me if I just get a little theoretical in 2 seconds. The way the law changes, or the way the law of the land or policy changes, is either one of 2 ways. Either, number one, the government issues an executive fiat, so you have a top-down approach of policy making in government, where government is concerned about something. So you see a lot of this in terms of tax law. So the government wants to enlarge the tax bracket. There's no public consultation about whether you want to be added to the tax bracket or whatever. You just wake up, the finance bill is passed, and you have to pay an extra 30 shillings in your fuel, for your fuel. The other way is that it's changed through public agitation and through community, the citizens of a country coming together and saying this must change. Clearly, the top-down approach is not working for conservation. Conservation is not demonstrably, and I apologize to, well, no, really, I don't apologize. The conservation is not a practical top priority for the government as it stands right now. Otherwise, we would be seeing the change on the ground. We would be seeing executive statements from State House, from cabinet secretaries, from governors, translating to actual verifiable difference on the ground in terms of what we actually do with our natural resources. And it brings me to the point that if we want things to change, we have to stop this Kenyan mentality of serikali saidia. There's no animal like the government. You don't take the government to court. Who is the government? If I asked all of you here, point to me, tell me this is the government, this person here right now is the government. What you have is people in public offices. You have this new animal called Chief Administrative Secretary. You have cabinet secretaries. You have governors. Those are the people in those offices. And personally, I think that it's time we started making government officials who make these decisions personally liable for the negligence that's going on. Because really, it's negligence. If you went to a doctor and some of these decisions were made on you, you would be in court, suing that particular doctor. So let's ask ourselves, if we move from serikali's idea, government help, and looking to government, what is the government doing? And we start asking ourselves, what will I as Elizabeth, do on a day-to-day basis to alleviate this problem? Will I just sit in a matatu and complain about it? Will I have a few drinks with my friends and say, have you seen how the trees have been cut down? This government is doing the worst, eh? Yeah, it's doing the worst. And then you go to bed or you watch Netflix, right? And then you start again tomorrow. Let's ask ourselves, what can we do individually, specifically as individual citizens of this country to actually alleviate that particular problem?
So that's a perfect segue to the next section, because what Liz is talking about is what can be done. Not just what will you do, but what actually can be done, because each member of this panel represents a different group of expertise and stakeholders. Admittedly, we don't have anybody from the government up here right now, but we all engage government in one way or another, and we vote and elect in those government officials. So I would love to hear from all the panelists, what can be done? What can be done to address this problem? And I really want us to think about elephants in particular. We've said elephants are in trouble because of land subdivision, destruction of habitats. We've seen wildlife corridors being interrupted. We've seen developments that are not sustainable right in the middle of our wilderness areas. What actually can be done to safeguard the future of elephants in Kenya? And I think we should think a little bit more broadly across the continent. I'm going to start with John. What do you think? What actually can be done?
I see the challenge of elephants in two ways. One is the loss of habitat, and the other one is the way we interact with elephants. I worry that at some point among communities we have elevated the issue of the hostility of the elephant to the level of a predator. You know, for lions, let's say if a hyena ate my goat, I won't complain much. But if a lion ate my goat, my goodness, I'll go crazy. And you'll never understand why people pick up spears when a lion eats something, but they do nothing when a smaller predator does the same. We're becoming competitors. You know, I worry that people are starting to see elephants as competitors in the ecosystem and elevate it to that level because it becomes very risky. When I start looking at elephant as dangerous as a lion, that worries me. Because elephants are expanding their territories, that's a fact. Elephants are going to, because the numbers are slightly increased, they're going to places, they're looking for more space. But if the communities where the elephants go to start looking at elephants as a threat, then we're not creating more space for elephants because we need to create more space. If they are losing their natural habitat, then we need to create more space for them. But if we are not receptive of them, if we look at them as the enemy again, the way we have done to the lions and the leopards, then the numbers will start shrinking again. So what needs to be done is, I always say it's the re-engineering of community thinking towards wildlife. Because young people who have not seen elephants in 40 years are suddenly meeting elephants every day. And what they do, the first reaction is hostility. Even if the elephant has not done anything wrong, they try to be antagonistic towards the animals. Sometimes it's nothing. They've just seen it and they're going crazy. They're demonstrating. We saw it in the Kajiado Central. Demonstration against elephants that are just roaming. They're just going. So I think to me, the mind is really what needs to change among those communities, because if we learn elephant behavior at a younger age, we'll be able to live with them. I know they need a lot of space. Sometimes they walk through bomas thinking it's just a bush. But we can learn, if we learn to respect the elephants, they will definitely reciprocate and do that. But as long as we have this in our minds that elephant is a dangerous animal, or they're walking through my shamba, or they're walking through our school, then that's a problem. So I think we need to re-engineer how people think about it.
Is it working in the conservancies where you work?
Absolutely, you know. So when because there are people who, I was saying there are people who have not seen elephants in 40 years, but now they're seeing elephants almost every other day. And the first reaction was panic. You know, you'll see the KWS, they call KWS, they call our rangers, they call everybody. So normally what we do is we call community meetings. Hey, we have an elephant here. There are 2, there are 3, there are 4. They used to come and go, now they're staying. So you start telling people about elephant behavior. One of them is distance. Keep your distance. Don't go taking selfies. We lost a young man 2 years ago because he was taking a selfie. Unbelievable. We lost another one because he had his earphones on and walking through the bush, not realizing that there were actually animals in the place. So there are a lot of things that we can do to protect ourselves. So when you tell them the distance, you keep your distance. Keep your distance. Don't yell. Don't throw anything. We were surprised that elephants started hanging around. You know, nobody bothered them. Kids were going to school. Someone knows they're there. They watch from a distance, but they don't do anything. And then elephants become calm. But the moment we start throwing rocks at them or yelling at them or hooting when we saw them, you know, I saw a video online one of these days where people were hooting at the elephants crossing, I think Mombasa Road somewhere. So it's really up to us. Sometimes it's not really animal behavior. It's really your behavior as a person that determines how an animal behaves.
Thank you. Thanks and congratulations. I'm going to go to this side now for the next one. Let's start with, I'm going to go to Kari first.
Okay. I would like to look from the storytelling aspect of elephants specifically. I come from, in the tourism industry, I was very strongly focused on marketing, communications. And one of the things we learned in marketing is that if you want to sell a product or a service, pull out the benefits. What is the benefit of this product or service to the person, to the customer, or to the buyer? That's the message you push. The same thing applies, in my opinion, when you're talking about wildlife or the environment or natural resources. All of us here, I would say, are the converted. I think for the most part, we are pro-elephants. We want to protect them. We want to protect their environment, etc. But there are far more people out there who really don't care much. They see them as a menace and a nuisance. So as media, as writers, as storytellers, as people in the film industry, we need to push the message as to what is the benefit of protecting these animals. Benefit to you as an individual or to your community. Rupi, for example, has written an article in East African, and I think it's online at the moment, about the carbon benefits of an elephant. An African elephant can produce, how many million was it? $1.75 million worth of carbon credit, whereas that same elephant, if you sell its ivory, it's less than $50,000. So if you can make the connection between why we need to protect those elephants, because they then protect the environment that we're trying to preserve. Why do we need to leave aside space for elephant corridors? If we give them the space for them to move, they will stay away from, let's say, our farms, or they'll stay away from our shambas, or stay away from our communities. So it's trying to push a narrative where you're showing the benefits, especially for people for whom there isn't that just love of nature. So that message is what needs to come across, which I think the Western world has done a fantastic job of over the years through the film industry and television and narratives, and people like the Attenboroughs of this world is pushing a message as to what is the benefit of protecting the wildlife. Granted, they've also lost a lot of their wildlife over the years in the road to development, but we can learn from them so that we don't go down that same road of completely destroying everything, and then 100 years from now, trying to figure out how to get back elephants and lions. So for me, it is how we can push forward narratives that are positive for individuals, for communities, and for a nation, so that we get the buy-in, the mental, emotional buy-in of people towards protecting, whether it's elephants or lions or just our natural resources as much as possible.
Fantastic, thank you. So really strategically rethinking the way we communicate. How about you, Liz?
I think for me, I'm a big believer in spheres of influence. Going back to the point I made at the beginning and how laws are created or formulated in a society. Trying to change laws by changing the hearts and minds of our leaders. We might go extinct, to use Dr. Muruthy's words. But I think it's possible to change laws, and especially land use planning and land use zoning laws, and compel government officials to actually do their job if we take advantage of our spheres of influence. Let us be known as the person who's always talking about conservation to their friends. So I think there's this thing that's called, is it a book or it's a movie, The 6 Degrees or something like that, where you know someone who knows someone who knows someone who knows blah, blah, blah. And I wish I had a flip chart and I could draw the circles that I have in my mind. Assume that you have 5 people who you often hang out with. And those 5 people have another 5 people that they hang out with. And if every time you have a conversation with these colleagues or friends or travel partners and friends, and you have the conversation surrounding, our elephants are in danger, there's land use planning. I had a conversation with John about how one day he had buffaloes at his backyard, the next day there were floods up, and he no longer sees the buffaloes. And what can we do? The people you talk to, even if they're not essentially in conservation, they are managing directors in companies that are making environmental and sustainability decisions. They are teachers in universities that are teaching civil engineering students, and they're telling them, oh, there's this new thing about being environmentally conscious in your designs. They are architects, they are so on and so forth. So I think one of the really simple directly transferable things that we can do as individuals is make use of our spheres of influence. Let's be known as the elephant person, the elephant girl, the elephant man, as it were. Thank you.
I really like that. Thank you. Philip.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think it's becoming obvious or certain to each one of us that there is not a single thing that we need to do. We need to do several things. But I want to go back to basics. Thank you, John, for reminding us we have sometimes to go to basics. And I'm going to ask the audience and ask myself. Paula has posed a question to us, what should be done to save elephants, to ensure them a future? And I'm going to ask ourselves, what do we want? Do you want 40,000 elephants in Kenya? 100,000? 10? 0? Is that a question you can answer? It is very important to, because of the pressures that we are having, and you just did strategic planning, by the way, when you voted. You have outlined, if somebody could just put that graphic up. Because what you did is rank threats to elephants. And so we do know where we could start. I saw land fragmentation and loss who had 17 or 21 votes. Poaching was next. So what we need to do, you already have undertaken that. There is a process going on right now in Kenya to write our National Elephant Action Plan. It's being steered by the Ministry of Wildlife and Tourism and Wildlife, through KWS. That is the place where Kenyans, including yourselves, are making a decision of the question that I just asked you. What growth rate do you want? How many total? This is a 10-year plan. And it is a participatory process, and I'm glad I'm here to tell you that it is going on, and you should find a way, either ask me or Paula, how you can answer that question. Because I think the luxury of where things used to happen laissez-faire, and the space was wide, and the corridors were open, we are no longer there. Where will you put your elephants? Let me just quote some numbers, if you allow me. At 1970, there were about 1.3 million elephants on the continent of Africa. By 2005, there were about 600,000. Now, there are about 415,000. So about a third of the elephants that were there in the 1970s now exist on our continent. Forest elephants are much more affected. There are very few. Even that number that I have quoted of 415,000, about 85% of those are only in the SADC countries, including Tanzania. Kenya has done a relatively good job, but not from a 1970s to 2022 angle, because we used to have a lot of elephants in the 70s. We had a lot of poaching in the 70s and 80s until about 89, when the ivory trade was banned through CITES, and then our elephant population has recovered. The most recent national census that was done, I think, gives an estimate of about 38,000. Our elephant population is actually increasing. And I'm going to again pose a question. Elephants occur in this country in different pockets. Where are we going to put more elephants? Where can we find opportunities like the one John is talking about to deal with the issue of land fragmentation and habitat loss? Do we want to continue with an onward, upward trajectory for the elephant population? We have to ask for those benefits that Kari has mentioned, for example, but this cannot be done without having a strategic approach anymore. So I would urge us to get involved in the planning, lobby, but also look at what the data is saying and what actions can be taken. We have cases in Kenya of local overabundance. This is something that people don't think about. There are areas where there are more elephants than what biologists call carrying capacity, the ability of a habitat to carry a certain number of animals in places like Shimba. There are other places where there are opportunities. In Savo, you could grow the populations and maybe going north. So what is our plan? It is not very clear what we ourselves want. Once we have done that, once we have decided as a nation what we want, then we will be able to work towards it. But the threats, you guys have just actually enumerated what needs to be done. We need anti-poaching. We need quickly to resolve this issue of habitat loss and connectivity. Elephants are large mammals that require resources, and they need large areas. If you confine wildlife into areas that are fenced, then you've got to make very clear and difficult decisions about what we biologists like to call biological management. In a laywoman's term, you've got to consider some drastic measures like killing some, culling some, translocating some. But I would say that in this country, we still have space. We still have the potential to recover some areas and allow animals to move around, and with them, benefits that accrue with having that natural resource. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. I'm still hoping that we'll get that slide up. I wanted to also add that, from my perspective, I'm an ecologist. I studied elephants. I moved into policy, and then I moved into storytelling, making wildlife documentaries. And it occurs to me that if you go to some countries and they'll be like asking the question that Kari asked, what's the point of elephants? How do we benefit from elephants? So, well, you can eat it. You can turn its hides into handbags or make its feet into stools. You can turn its tusks into jewelry. You can work out the commercial value of an elephant in certain economies. In Kenya, you can't do any of those things. So the cost of an elephant is, or the value of an elephant is negative to many people, right? It costs you something to have elephants around because they are going to eat your crops or damage your property, injure your loved ones. But in filmmaking, I discovered that actually there is an opportunity that is being missed. It's not just filmmaking, it's actually in storytelling. So if you think about BBC Natural History Unit, BBC David Attenborough, National Geographic, Disney, Discovery, all these companies that make wildlife documentaries. First and foremost, you know where the whole idea of wildlife documentaries came from? It came from Kenya. The Born Free series was the very first kind of television series about wildlife that grabbed the world's attention. That this story about people who love animals and we're going to save them, that was captivating. And it actually catalyzed a global environmental movement. But if you think about the wildlife documentaries that are made in our continent, all of the economic value that is generated from those films is actually primarily outside of our continent. Wildlife Direct's crew is the only crew of African people making wildlife documentaries on this entire continent. The entire continent, where thousands of documentaries are being made every year. Crews come to Kenya. They come with their budgets already locked. They can't even allow an assistant, an apprentice, an intern. It's impossible because everything is locked down in Bristol or somewhere in America. And this has been going on for decades. Nobody really asked the questions, and still we started asking National Geographic, how come there's no films with African people presenting? How come African animals are always being told by people from outside? What does that mean? Who's making the money? Let me tell you, the wildlife film industry is worth hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions. The Planet Earth series, $100 million for one series of, I think, 5 or 6 episodes. There's money in wildlife documentaries. We just have been kept out of it. So this is an area of opportunity, I think. If you're a community and you have elephants, you can make money on those elephants again and again and again and again without cutting its legs off or taking its tusks and turning them into jewelry. The film industry in Africa is thriving. We all know that. Nollywood, the South African film industry, even Kenya is producing documentaries now that are being shown on Netflix and other major streaming services. There's an enormous amount of money in the entertainment industry when it comes to film and digital media. But it hasn't turned its eye onto wildlife yet. And so for me, this is the great opportunity, because some conservancies will never attract enormous numbers of tourists. They're remote, they're isolated, they might be in dangerous places, they might have floods, they may be inaccessible. But actually, from a filmmaker's perspective, those are the best. Those are the best places where you discover something new and you get to share a story that's never been told before. Those are the places that will attract crews, and of course those crews come with a lot of opportunities to spend money. So from my perspective, I think that this whole idea of making wildlife documentaries, what I would love to see is that it turns into another economic driver for conservation, because the more conservancies that become filmmaking locations in this country, the more we showcase our country. And I believe Kenya should be the world's superpower for biodiversity conservation. And that should be shown through the films that we make.
I think, Paula, sorry to cut you short before you continue on the next point. You raise a very pertinent issue about money, all right? And you're quoting some figures over here. We are reconsidering our career choices. But on a serious note, the reason your neighbor built flats as opposed to opting to listening to buffalo noises as they drink in the evening or the morning, is because it has a dollar value in his pocket. At the end of the day, when all is said and done, and buffaloes are fantastic, and you can hear them, and we can see them and feel wonderful and mushy inside, it has a tangible dollar value in his pocket. And until we find ways to incentivize wildlife conservation and elephant conservation, most specifically to the communities who have until now provided space for wildlife as a public good, out of the goodness of their heart, essentially, really, right? Until we find a way to incentivize wildlife conservation the same way we incentivize agriculture and fertilizers, the same way we incentivize manufacturing, all right? The same way we incentivize any other sector in the economy, we will still be having this panel discussion in 2042, literally 20 years from now. And we will still be having the same problem of, we are now facing extinction, as Dr. Muruthi has talked about. I think we need to really seriously think about how do we, as a community, as the decision makers, because the people in this room are the people making decisions. It's us who sit in those offices, who sit in those round tables, who sit in those donor committee breakfast meetings, who sit in negotiations for international agreements and whatnot. And we are the ones who have to figure out a way of incentivizing community so that a community member, a landowner, let me not even use the word community member, a landowner on whose land wildlife occurs never has to make the choice to beg for school fees and bursaries because his land has elephants and he can't build apartments on it because there's a zoning law that says this is a wildlife corridor. You know, looking at it from a devil's advocate, yeah, horrible word, but looking at it from that perspective, we need to get to that point where the automatic choice for a landowner on whose land wildlife occurs is wildlife conservation, because it feeds his children or her children, it takes care of the family in terms of health, and it provides him with a dollar value in the pocket at the end of the day. I think so.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add a point about accountability. You are all taxpayers, whether you like it or not. Because you pay your taxes through, you know, when you buy petrol if you work like me, you pay payee. We have to take those who are on whose we have placed the responsibility for conservation, the ministry, for example, to be accountable. I mentioned that we are setting up a strategy, a national action plan. And it is very, very important, just like any other sphere of life, for us to ask, how much do we have? If you put your money in your bank today and you have been promised a certain increase, next year you know how much your original money plus interest, how much total you will have. How many times did you ask yourself that question about natural resources? How many of you have bothered to read the just recently released National Wildlife Census results? Just show of hand. Well, thank you very much. There are a few of them, but a majority have not. But that is your heritage. And if there is a downward trend, we should go back to government and the NGOs like ours and Wildlife Direct and ask, hey, what's wrong? What's eating us? When did the rain start beating us? Is something going wrong? Otherwise, we wake up one day and we have 2 northern white rhino. And now the process of trying to get those animals back is very, very expensive. All the benefits are gone, both ecological and socioeconomic, that would have come with those animals. So my point is, ask those questions. Our constitution in Kenya, there's a lawyer in the house, so I'll be careful, but it promises you a clean environment. And it promises you, it mentions, Vision 2030 mentions wildlife corridors, it mentions, and the Act mentions that wildlife will be doing well. So in Kenya, I know that I'm safeguarded by the Constitution and our laws to have a clean environment and biodiversity conserved. As a citizen, I have the obligation to ask how it is doing, and that should be well documented. And I think that's our responsibility to ask those questions. There is a direct correlation between good governance and environmental health. If I'm the leader of this country and rivers are dirty, animals' populations are going down, then I cannot claim that I'm governing well. We should take people to be accountable. It's bad governance when your citizens cannot get clean water, clean air, and wildlife and habitats are declining. That's my viewpoint.
I'm gonna thank you. Thanks, Philip. I'm gonna take a leap here and ask the audience. How many people in the audience actually think wildlife and healthy natural environment is important? How many of you actually care about the natural environment? Like, it's important to you? Is anybody that doesn't think so? Okay, great. Keep your hands up. Keep your hands up. I want to see all those hands up. I'll keep them up. I want to see if there's anybody who doesn't. I don't see even one person without their hand up. Okay, keep them up. Keep them up. Keep them up. Now, those who have written to your member of parliament, your governor, the minister, or any other government official, keep your hand up. The other ones, take your hands down. How many of you have actually written to a government official? Okay. Thank you. So thank you very much for your honesty. This is really, really important because we are an audience of people who really do care. But then when it comes to the action, there is something in the way. And that's something that I think we need to get at in the last remaining few minutes of this conversation. I saw Jim Nyamu wants to say something. So
Thank you, Paula. I didn't want to lose this, but Dr. Muruthi and John mentioned a bit why and where do we want to see elephants and why are we losing them? We mentioned so many things and I'm happy to see the law and so many things. But I think there's one area that we all must agree that we can have everything here, but when it comes to the governance issues, the people who are leading conservation in this country, when Paula was asking what make me awake, I find myself one time in the bathroom with a cup. I was meant to go to the kitchen, but I find myself in the bathroom. Because, you wake up every day and you find things that are happening and you are like, do we have the right people? Are we short of people who should lead conservation in this country? Does it bother you when you find people washing their vehicles inside the river? Do we have governance in this country? We may sit in this room here all talking about, everybody here wants to see elephant. Dr. Morothy asked, is it a question of how many elephants do we want to have in this country? The one we have, are we able to maintain them? So my thing is what I'll be doing is establishing more citizen leadership, people who are concerned. Yeah, our voice will go up. Do we have someone who listen and take action? How many times, I don't think even Paula can visit any park in this country. I don't think you can visit. She can't visit any park in this country. She's been banned from visiting the park. I'm walking up and about, talking to Kenyans why you should be concerned in conserving wildlife, water, etc. Are we hard enough?
Thank you. I really do like what you just said about we need citizen movement, but we also need to be very strategic about how citizens engage. We have recently, I'm sure you're all aware about the forest bill that has been presented to Parliament, right? So there's a proposal to amend the forest bill that could actually result in a lot of grabbing of our national forests. That will be disastrous. I love elephants. Elephants are just one species. Our forests are treasure troves of biodiversity. That is where most of the biodiversity of this country is in forests. But more than that, forests are not just a pack of trees. Forests are living organisms, ecosystems. The trees are communicating with each other. There are so many species interacting with each other. And when you've lost a forest and you start planting trees, let's stop kidding ourselves. We are not planting forests, we are planting trees. To create a forest takes thousands of years. So when it came to challenging the government on the forest bill, what I've witnessed, and I think Liz can also add to this, is that people are very, very excited about it, very concerned. Everybody wants to take action. The first thing everyone did is go and press that petition on Avaz, Care, whatever. And as much as we want to do this, and it sends a message, but it doesn't send a message to the people in government who actually will take the action. We need to also educate the communities and the citizen groups who have the powers to actually go to the government. We need to educate them about how to engage effectively. The best idea I heard, I don't know if you heard this idea, Liz, the best idea I heard was to mobilize every constituency in the whole country through the community forest associations to get just 1,000 signatures each. It's very easy. 1,000 signatures on a petition to your parliamentarian. That MP cannot go to Parliament and vote in support of a bill when he has 1,000 signatures on a petition. He literally cannot, especially not in an election year. So there are some really simple solutions. It requires us to be more strategic and actually to engage in a more effective way. And I think we need to create those structures to enable ordinary citizens to actually have the power. Actually, no, we have the power. Let's not lie. We have the power. It's actually to exercise, that's the right word, to exercise the powers that we have that are given to us by the Constitution, by the laws. And actually in the commitments that our president has made in many, many times at international conventions. Did you want to say something?
Can I say something?
Sure.
I would like to make a proposal for, when it comes to the storytelling aspect from the media, or people who write, or whether they're in the formal media environments or do it something they enjoy. Quite often I get invitations from, let's say, hotels or companies who are promoting whatever new product, whatever they're doing, something, a strategy they've come up with. Come visit our place, come to this event, see what's happening, and then go and write about it, talk about it, tell the world about it. I find there's less so coming from the wildlife conservation, natural resources environment. It's not until I come to forums like this, I suddenly hear, this is what's happening, this is what scientists like yourself are doing. So there's a gap, I feel, in those who are in the position to bring in the media on board, to be proactive about it. Whether it's an embassy supporting a particular initiative in the conservation, wildlife, environmental, natural resources world, get the writers who are in that particular area. If you're having an event in Nairobi, get them on board. They will talk about it. And they're very simple ways, very inexpensive ways to get the media involved so that they tell the story to an audience that you don't necessarily reach, outside of your usual reach. So be proactive. If you're in a position to do so from whatever organization that you work with, be proactive in reaching out to the people who can communicate your message, communicate what you're doing, tell the wider world, tell ordinary citizens outside of the scientific community, this is what's happening, these are the positive stories, this is the success we've achieved in our community, in our conservancies, etc. Bring people in and they will talk about it. So proactively reaching out to the writers and the media and fraternity.
So John, you need to invite the media to your place.
Yes, we would love to come. We would love to come, yes.
Okay, does anybody else have a question for any panelist? I can see one question up there. Back of the room, yeah?
Hello.
Just wait for microphone. Could you please tell us your name and where you're from?
Yes, my name is Enoch Kideka, and I am from Kiambu County. Basically, what I do in the part of storytelling, I tell with my local dialect, even if they don't view. So I was to ask you, even if you are saying the media to come about, we should incorporate the local people to be telling and airing with what they understand. You know, when you are speaking with the doctor's language, the person who is back there at the rural area will be like, amesoma, or yes. So we should be embracing from deep down, from the grassroots, and it will be really good. And I will love that, because sharing will be caring, and we will make things work out. Thank you.
Thank you, Enoch.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, name and where you're from? Wait, where are you? Oh, there you are.
So my name is Geoffrey Mboya. I'm a social media manager for Veterinarian International, and I'm also a youth advisor for We Don't Have Time. And so it's a review platform, and I also works with vets. We work with All Jogi up in the north to provide veterinary care and education to the local communities. So I came in late, but my biggest concern is how are we driving this conversation with the young people? Because all over the world, we're seeing how youth movement are driving conversation around climate, conversation around wildlife, and so how can we nurture these with the young people at a very young age? And so just to thank Paula, recently with my friend Enoch, we were at the place where Joanna Shootberry was killed, and was killed. And so we did planting, courtesy of Paula's help. And so such examples where we invite young people to understand these issues will be really critical. And so my question to the panel will be, how can we drive this conversation with the young people in communities, in schools, and really bring up young people who are concerned about our environment? Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, did you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. this is going to come off a bit Republican, but I have a question for all the young people. I'm almost out of the youth bracket, so I can say the young people. The question is this: was there a drive nationally to teach the youth Sheng? Was there? Was there a social media drive? And I'm saying this with a lot of honesty and a lot of openness in trying to find the solution, right? There was never a national drive to teach young people Sheng. Out of the blues, this urban language cropped up that the youth in Embu, where I come from, can understand, and they just need to spend 2-3 hours with a youth from Kariobangi or a youth from Ongatarongai, and suddenly they know what the dialect is, and they can literally badmouth you in front of you, not even behind your back, all right? And that's the point, that we have to start having the conversation within our sphere of influence. Your sphere of influence as youth is your fellow youth. The way Dr. Muruthi is going to talk to youth, it's going to be, Daktari, I'm so sorry, very boring, okay? He will tell you statistics about elephants that were there in 1970 and now they have dropped and there's a certain number and there's culling. Who knows what culling is here? Raise your hand. 3 out of 25 youth know what culling is. You see what I mean? So because you're in this room and because you guys are in this room, your sphere of influence is how we are going to enroll the youth into the conversation. I think that's the best way I could answer that question. Yeah.
So, Philip.
Yes, let me also address that question as I am an alumnus of the youth. I think in addition to what Liz is saying, what she's saying is very true. But we who are no longer youth have to make a concerted effort to include youth. The way I shall measure how I succeed in my career is if I will have groomed somebody to take my position. And if I have not done that, I'm a failure. So it's very important for youth to be involved. And at the African Wildlife Foundation where I work, we have now a youth program. We also have a media training. We're talking to journalists. We've trained journalists in Central Africa, Southern Africa, and here in Nairobi for East Africa. It's very important what he mentioned, to translate this scientific information in ways that people don't ask, what is this culling? We must, and that's why I said earlier that this panel kind of represents the future of elephants. This is what you need. You need to take that very high level modeling of population and the effect of climate change and all those, incomprehensible graphs to ways that, as my advisor when I did my degree used to say, if you cannot tell it to your grandmother, then you don't deserve a degree. Tell it to your grandmother. If she understands it, then you've got your degree. You are a doctor.
Thank you. I think that we have...
His Beatrice would like to share her experience.
Oh, okay.
She would like me to share my experience. Okay, good evening, and thank you for this wonderful panel discussion. My name is Beatrice Despioche, and I'm the co-founder of a social enterprise called Eco Charcoal Limited, with my husband, native from Kasigao, in Taita Taveta, Voi sub-county, southeastern Kenya. We set up this social enterprise. We have been developing and setting up a mitigation, an ecosystem, a dryland ecosystem conservation strategy by also sustainably producing clean, safe, healthy biomass briquettes just by clipping, pruning the branches of specific trees and shrubs. So it means that our methodology can ensure the quick regeneration of the trees. The main idea is to reduce the pressure on the local natural forest resources, but also creating jobs for the rural communities, and also protect the wildlife habitat. Because if people have heard about Kasigao, but it's just located between both Tsavo national parks. So what we have been faced and found out is that we can, if we are really protecting the local dryland forest resources, it's possible to create a balance between the humans and elephants, because it happened to us, and especially between October and December, we had groups and groups and groups of elephants coming, getting in, getting out. Even the community people used to call our forest land the park. They say the elephants are in the park. Yes, it's true. They were in the park, and of course, we had to repair the fence constantly. But we never stopped producing briquettes. And I think there have been, I don't know who was monitoring who, because even the elephants could monitor us, when we were sustainably producing the briquettes. Nobody has been injured, because my husband is native from there. He knows exactly how to control, how to monitor, how to chase the elephants. And it's true. I know this area for the last 17 years, so I've been monitoring, observing what is happening. Of course, there is the population growth. Of course, there is this need for land. There is also, I think we need to have an holistic approach, because, of course, when there is repetitive droughts, the wildlife is coming close to the communities. And we have been observing also the change of behaviors of the elephants, because I remember 10 years ago when we were clapping timbers, the elephants were really, a bit nervous and moving. Now they are just looking at us, and they don't move, they don't change. And I know that it's terrible when, they are doing crop raidings, and people now are really starving. And even, with what we have been facing in 2020, 2021, it has been very difficult. So it means that we need to see the full conservation and protection of the elephants with an holistic approach, meaning that I think it means that we have to find out other ways of farming. So we need not to clear the land anymore, but adapt, I think, climate-smart agricultural technologies, and, for example, in a plot or a land, planting trees, but meaning planting the right spaces, matching with the right soil, because so many mistakes have been made with the planting trees projects. So I think there is hope, because we have seen what is happening. When you know exactly which kind of tree species, you can use or just prune, for producing the right clean, self-healthy biomass fuel. I think, we can make a change. But you highlighted something. It's that all these people like us, what we love nature, we love trees, we love biodiversity, we love ecosystem. We are struggling like crazy. We're investing our soul, our energy, our time, our money. I mean, it's extremely difficult when you are working at a small scale level to get, part of, for example, carbon finance compensation. And I think what I noticed as well, if we are not compensating at the grassroots level the people who have been victims from crop raiding, and if, of course, they know they are protecting the elephants, of course, they don't want to kill them. But we need to find I think, a clear, holistic approach, policies. So it means that research scientists have to come on board. The private sector, like CARES, has to come on board. The NGOs, the lawyers, the policymakers. I'm also involved in the Clean Cooking Association of Kenya, and I'm part of some lobby, with the Ministry of Energy. We need to come all together because with what we are doing, many ministries are involved, but also we need to involve the county governments and also some national authorities. Thank you.
Thank you. Really, really appreciate that. Fascinating work. I think we have one last question or comment.
Good evening, all. Thank you for that. I'm Faisal. I'm photographing at this exhibition here. I'm also a wildlife filmmaker. Currently, we have been filming in the Amboseli ecosystem for the last 7 months, doing a beautiful documentary on elephants. A very beautiful story, that is, specifically in the Selenke conservation area. My concern is we noticed there's been a lot of land use change around the Amboseli ecosystem. Land has been subdivided. Beacons have been put out. I have seen beacons going right up to the Amboseli National Park, going all the way to the Selenke ecosystem, which means very soon title deeds will be given. Individual land ownership, I think there are 21-acre land allocations per person. Tomorrow, that new owner could sell that land because legally that's his land. And voila, we have our beautiful apartments facing Mount Kenya National Park. So my question to the panelists today, who did a lovely job, and Paula, thank you for this, is what can be done to stop this? Because we really need that migration route to remain open for the elephants. Kimana to Amboseli National Park at one point is just 200 meters wide for the elephants. That's a migratory route. These routes will get closed as soon as people start owning these lands, deciding to farm. Already the road to the Kimana gate has 2 farms on it. One of them you successfully stopped. But I'm told Kichini, they've started farming again. So maybe you want to look into that. And there's a second farm already up about 5 kilometers from the gate that's up and running. So my question to the panel is, what can be done to stop this? Because the moment those fences come, the moment real estate agents buy that 21 acres subdivided into 1/8 acre and tell people, come own your apartment facing Mount Kilimanjaro, that's it for the elephants. That's it.
Thanks, Faisal. Wow, you gave us the most difficult question for the end. And in fact, AWF has worked in that ecosystem. I have worked in the ecosystem. Liz works in that ecosystem. John comes from that ecosystem. And I'm sure you've written about that part of the ecosystem. I personally think that what's been missing for the whole region is actually a plan that involves a proper get-together of the landowners to understand what the possibilities are for the future. I was offered land, actually, to buy land. Sometimes I kick myself. I think, why didn't I just buy the land? I was working for African Wildlife Foundation at the time. They told me I'd be fired if I bought it. Actually, they didn't say that. But what they said was, it's contradictory to buy land in these corridors, even though I actually thought I would keep it open. But I think that this is a very, very difficult challenge. And my big fear, maybe what keeps me up at night about Amboseli, is we may have already lost too much in that area. I'm going to pass it on to Liz, who's actually the lawyer who's working on behalf of many conservation organizations on that particular farm you're talking about, which is the avocado farm, that got me into legal hot soup because I raised that issue together with other people, put my name on it, and said what's happening here is not right. We're dealing with people who are very aggressive, very litigious, and also quite invisible. Liz?
So that's the hot soup that I told you she keeps throwing me into. So one of those circumstances. But I think to start with, let me say that I will try to address your question, Faisal. Your name gives me goosebumps. There's another Faisal we had interesting. So I'll try to answer it within the confines of what I can as a officer of the court in that particular issue that's ongoing in there. I think broadly speaking, in terms of corridors, one of the challenges that we find ourselves having, and especially in respect to land management, is that Chapter 5 of our Constitution is a contradictory chapter in quite a number of ways. Preceded by Chapter 4, Chapter 4 is the Bill of Rights. One of the rights included in Chapter 4 is the right of every citizen to hold and use property in Kenya in whichever way they choose to. All right? It's a constitutional right. Then you go on to Chapter 5 that tells you that you have a right to a clean and healthy environment. It also tells you that you don't have to demonstrate local standard, meaning you don't have to show a harm specifically to you. As long as it's a harm to the environment, you can approach the court to protect the environment. The same chapter tells you that the government has a mandate to manage land sustainably and to use land use, zoning, and planning to manage natural resources. So all of these rights must be enforced, and they accrue to citizens of Kenya equally, all right? Now, one of the problems that then that translates to is that when you try to translate those particular provisions in the Constitution down to the law, you come down to the Wildlife Conservation and Management Act that protects species, all right? Endangered species, critically the stuff that Dr. Muruthi was talking about in respect of extinction. It also talks about protecting land as long as that land is well defined as a conservancy, as a national park, as a national sanctuary, as a national reserve, so on and so forth. However, and as a forest, then you have the Forest Act and you have all the other sectoral acts, you have the Environmental and Management Act. Now, where the lacuna is, or the gap is that privately held land, the title deeds you're talking about, the community land as well, the management of that land is left to the quote-unquote whims, if I can use that word, of the person who owns the land. That is why John's neighbor, and I'm really sorry to keep hammering on this neighbor of yours, I hope he's not watching this. Yeah. But your neighbor, that's why your neighbor, he has title to the land, he can do whatever he wants with it. The problem is that with these wildlife corridors, we don't have a provision in law that protects critically endangered habitat. We have a provision that protects critically endangered species, but we forget to protect the habitat underlying, the species, all right? And one of the processes that we were involved in quite heavily last year is the review of the current Wildlife Conservation and Management Act. And we spent hours upon hours doing stakeholder participation. And one of the very key things that emerged out of that process that will make it into the law is that citizens were very clear that corridors as a mandatory provision must be protected by the Wildlife Act. What this means is that we have now to create a balance between the right of a person to own and manage and use property, whichever way they choose, vis-a-vis the right of us as corporate citizens of Kenya to enjoy a clean and healthy environment, and to also honor the heritage status that is given to our wildlife by the Constitution. So I think the first thing that we need to do is, number one, to protect wildlife corridors as critically endangered habitat. And once you have a provision in law that says a critically endangered habitat is X, Y, Z, and you have the corridor in there, a migratory corridor, and these are the things you can and cannot do, as long as you hold land within a wildlife migratory corridor. It doesn't matter whether you're government holding land in a wildlife migratory corridor, it doesn't matter whether you're a private citizen, it doesn't matter whether you're a community. As long as your land is within a wildlife migratory corridor, these are the things you can do, these are the things you do. But that particular mandate or that particular provision, in my view, must be accompanied by incentives to actually manage that land that way. Otherwise, you will have a rich you'll have rich biodiversity in wildlife corridors, but impoverished communities, all right? And you'll go back to the problem that John was talking about of spearing animals and spearing elephants and people not really caring about wildlife. It's not a problem we can solve, with a click of a switch, but I think it's a problem that can be solved as long as we dig our heels in enacting the good law, going back to what I said about what a good law is. It's enforceable, it's practical, it applies uniformly to everybody, and incentivizing communities at the same time to keep these lands open.
Thank you so much, Liz. And I think that there are multiple solutions. Legal is one. There are also obviously financial instruments that could be used, which include things like carbon credits. There are existing legal instruments like easements, which could also actually apply. It's just that they haven't yet been applied. So we do have some tools. We do need more tools. But I think what's missing is either the economic drivers, like it's not yet here. This sector is deprived of oxygen. There is not much money in the conservation sector. But what we've noticed, for example, in the last 2 years, the number of people visiting Nairobi National Park, local Kenyans, has just skyrocketed. People are appreciating nature. Now, it could be COVID, it could be also there's much more information available for young people to learn about nature and get interested in it. So I think that there's many, many different ways that we can drive up the level of public interest, so people doing it from the goodness of their hearts, but also from other economic incentives and drivers. I think we've reached the end of our panel. I want to thank each and every one of you for coming and entertaining us with knowledge. Thank you so much to the audience. Thank you to the Alliance Française, the French Embassy, to all of you. Really, it's been phenomenal having this week of attention to my favorite animal, elephants. Thank you.
First, Paula and panelists, really thank you. Thank you for the audience also. You have stayed up to now with us. You are numerous for this topic, and it's how we can see that it's really a good debate to have in Kenya to speak about wildlife, not only tourism, but also actually human activities, conflict, democracy. I would like to say a few words, actually, after this panel discussion, and also the introduction to the exhibition that we had together, I think, 1 week ago. Kenya is really an inspiration for many countries, and for my country. I would like to make a comparison. You mentioned Kenya as a biodiversity billionaire. France is actually mainland France, a biodiversity beggar. We are very poor. No, it's not a joke. We are poor in biodiversity. We have more forests than you have as a cover of the national territory. But unfortunately, our wildlife has been degraded for many years because of development, because mainly of agriculture and the development of transportation, which is happening in your country now. It's interesting to compare Kenya and France. We have actually the same size, the same land size, more or less. We are both agricultural and tourism countries, and for population, we are more French than Kenyans. 50 million Kenyans, 66 for France. You will catch up with us, I think, in 15 years with your pace. But what is interesting, you mentioned 40,000 elephants. And it's only elephants. We can speak about many other species. It's a lot for us. I can give you the figures for bears in France, our biggest mammal in France. Do you know how many bears we have in France left? And they are being reintroduced. They are not there. How many? 64. 64. So yeah, and it's only in one region, I think, in the Pyrenees Mountains. And I can explained to you, we have many conflicts between peasants and conservationists in France because actually they are not accepted, although bears are not really dangerous, except if you cross the path between the mother and the cub, and the mother. Otherwise, they eat raspberries, ants, and they don't attack like this. But wolves are another problem. They are back to France. I think they come from Italy slowly. And it's quite new. They were eradicated. It's a word for some time in France. They are now back, and they are 624. And again, we have a lot of polemics in France, in the mountains, with peasants again. Because France, our economy, it's not that it is based on agriculture. We have now 93% of our people in cities in France. 93%, it's much more than you have. But still, to have real wildlife is an issue in France. So your model is a source of admiration for many. Of course, you have a lot of challenges. You will solve them yourselves, I can see, because you have a very vivid civil society, courageous people. And speaking about courage, it's my conclusion. It's not so often mentioned, but to be a conservationist, I think, or an environment defender is also a dangerous job. Because you end up dealing with organized crime very often. And actually, a figure I want to give you, 227 conservationists were killed last year. It's a record. It's 4 people per week. And an example was given today. So I want to pay homage to them and to thank you again for this support you give to wildlife. So now, to end up with a more positive note, I have a small gift, and I apologize because I heard what you said, John. You don't want to rely on donor support, but still, we didn't want you to get back to Kajiado without a souvenir. So, in the framework of this program supported by the Embassy of France, we wanted to hand over to you conservation. It's not a real one, but